Hey guys, tonight we travel back, way back to the sun-bleached courtyards of ancient Greece. The cicadas are humming marble columns, cast long shadows over dusty flagstones and your lower back. Oh, it's already giving you trouble. Because tonight, you're waking up as an elderly citizen of the classical world. A time before coffee, central heating, or orthopedic sandals. You're about to find out what it really meant to grow old in a place that worshipped youthful strength, war heroism, and philosophical debate, but offered no retirement plans. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this gracefully. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir awake under a rough wool blanket, the woven kind that smells like dust sheep and last winter's damp. Your mattress. A glorified sack of straw. Your first movement of the day is a groan, not poetic, not Socratic. Just an old man groan, the universal sound of joints catching up to gravity. Your knees crack when you stand. Your hip sounds like it's trying to compose its own tragic play. And that's before you've even taken a step toward the cold ceramic basin, where you'll splash water on your face and pretend it counts as hygiene. The water is icy, pulled from a well before sunrise, and it slaps you awake better than any Spartan discipline. You look down at your hands, gnarled, calloused. You remember when they used to be steady enough to hold a spear or carve a wine cup. Now they tremble slightly when you reach for your tunic. That morning chill isn't helping. Or maybe it's just that your body's become its own weather system forecast chronic aches, occasional mysterious pain, and a 70% chance of existential dread by noon. Mainstream historical fact: in ancient Greece, especially in places like Athens, elders were theoretically respected for their wisdom, but the reality was more complex. Age didn't guarantee status, and many elderly people still had to work, depend on family, or rely on public charity. You step out into this courtyard. The tiles are uneven. Your feet find every bump. A young servant boy brushes past you like you're furniture. You try to grumble something wise and vaguely disapproving, but it comes out as a wheeze. He doesn't even hear you. Or worse, he does, and he just doesn't care. You catch your reflection in a bronze mirror leaning against the wall. Not flattering. Bronze doesn't soften your wrinkles. It mocks them. Your hair's mostly gone, and what's left clings to the back of your head like stubborn vines. Your beard is patchy white and always full of crumbs. You try to remember when you last looked distinguished. Maybe before the Peloponnesian War. Or was it that spring you briefly flirted with stoicism? Quirky tidbit: some ancient Greeks believed old age was caused by the body drying out, so elders were encouraged to stay moist by drinking watered wine, oiling their skin, and avoiding overly dry foods. You're basically a human raisin trying to rehydrate. The morning's slow. You shuffle through the atrium, avoiding the enthusiastic young men preparing to exercise or philosophize or argue about taxes. You remember doing that once, arguing with flair, quoting Homer mid-sentence. Now you're mostly quoting your own complaints. Historians still argue whether Greek elders truly held special social power, or if the literary reverence for old men of wisdom was just aspirational, not lived reality. Plato idealized it. Aristophanes made fun of it. You're living it. And it's fine. Mostly. As the sun rises higher, casting sharp light across the courtyard tiles, you already miss your blanket. You also kind of miss the days when your joints didn't sound like a creaky ship coming into port. But hey, at least you're still breathing. You haven't been sacrificed to the gods for good crop weather yet. That's something right. You shuffle forward slowly, carefully toward breakfast, if your teeth agree to it. You arrive at the household table, or what counts as one, a low wooden setup with a few stools and woven mats that really don't do your spine any favors. A clay platter offers up today's feast olives, barley bread, a sad fig, and a wedge of goat cheese that smells like it fought in the Trojan War and lost. You stare at the bread. It stares back. It knows your molars aren't what they used to be. You attempt to gnaw at the corner like a cautious squirrel, then give up and soak it in watered wine like some soft-toothed philosopher. Chewing has officially become a full-body sport. A grandson runs past, yelling something about a foot race. You envy his knees. You envy his knees so much it hurts. Mainstream historical fact. Diet in ancient Greece was typically simple, especially for those not among the elite. Aged citizens would have had even more restricted choices, especially if they'd lost family or wealth. Meat was rare sweets, even rarer, and many elderly simply couldn't chew tough foods. Your adult son sits across from you, already dressed for the agra, smelling of lavender oil and pride. He talks mostly about taxes and politics. You nod at intervals pretending to follow, but you're mostly focused on whether the cheese is supposed to taste this dusty. Quirky tidbit. Some older Greeks used fig sap or wine resin to soften food, including rehydrating old bread. A few even carried personal wooden spoons or mashers not for status, but survival. You try to offer advice. The market's being overrun with cheap foreign amphora, you say, raising a weary brow. He grunts in that polite but stop-talking tone. You're aware of what's happening. You used to run the household. Now you're just part of it. Background commentary between meal. Your daughter-in-law offers you more wine. You nod gratefully, though it's mostly to help get the olive pit dislodged from that one troublesome tooth. Historians still argue whether elders were honored or merely tolerated. Some city-states granted old men the front-row seats at festivals or a place in advisory councils. Others shuffled them aside as soon as they could no longer contribute labor. Your youngest granddaughter sits beside you and tugs your sleeve. Grandpapa, tell the story of the Cyclops again. You smile toothlessly. Only if you mash this fig for me first. She giggles and obliges, delighted by your wheezing impression of a one-eyed monster. For a moment you feel important again. You are the keeper of tales, the living scroll. You may not walk far or eat fast, but you carry stories. And if that counts for anything in this busy house, you'll cling to it like a barnacle. Your son's already off to the agora. Your daughter-in-law tends to the weaving. The house swirls around you, active and efficient, and you're simply still. You sit a while longer. Your fig mashed, your bread softened, your belly mostly satisfied. You adjust the hem of your chiton scratch, that one spot on your knee that always itches in spring, and watch the morning pass you by. You think about breakfast back in your youth, when you would run to the fields, fresh bread in one hand, confidence in the other. You think about that one time you ate honey straight from the comb and didn't lose a single tooth doing it. And then you think, well, at least you haven't choked on an olive pit yet. There's always tomorrow. You shuffle out to this portico with a slight breeze following behind you and settle onto your favorite creaky stool, an old one, like you, stubbornly surviving with splinters and pride. You gaze out at the courtyard where a group of younger men are mid-debate, hands flailing in dramatic Athenian fashion, arguing whether justice is nature or law. You used to be in that circle. Now you're just within earshot. You clear your throat and toss in a line, justice is whatever doesn't make your back hurt. No one laughs. One boy glances at you, half pity, half politeness, and then keeps talking. Mainstream historical fact. While age was supposed to come with respect in classical Greece, especially in theory, from thinkers like Plato and Xenophon, the reality was often harsher. Elders could be sidelined socially once they could no longer contribute physically or politically. You sip from your clay cup and wish for stronger wine. Not to numb the pain, well, not just to numb the pain, but to soften the sharpness of being forgotten. Respect, it turns out, has a short shelf life. You cough once, twice. No one flinches. That's either a sign of social decline or just the new normal. You remember when your voice could silence a room. Now it's more like background noise, like goats in the distance, or a squeaky hinge. Quirky tidbit. Some elders, desperate to regain influence, became self-styled oracles in their later years. People assumed age brought wisdom, so certain grandpas leaned in, offering advice cloaked in divine mystery, or just very slow metaphors. You try that now. The olive tree grows strongest when pruned with care. You murmur toward a group of teens complaining about politics. They blink. One says, "Was that about war taxes?" Another mutters, I think he's talking about trees, you sigh. So much for oracular authority. Historians still argue whether the philosophical admiration for old age, like in Plato's Republic, reflected real societal norms, or was more aspirational. Some believe only wealthy elite men got to enjoy aging with grace. Everyone else just aged. A friend of yours shuffles by a former hoplite who now walks with a limp and a staff. You nod to each other like old statues tipping their heads in solidarity. No words needed, just mutual understanding we've made it this far. And yes, it's a little overrated. You think back to your own youth. Your first vote at the assembly. Your first good speech at the agora. Your first heartbreak, courtesy of a woman who liked philosophers but married a potter with better calves. You think about your name once etched into a stone tablet for a public work now half-eroded pigeons, probably nesting on it. A child runs past, nearly tripping on your sandals. He doesn't even say sorry. You mutter, "That's democracy for you." You miss when your opinions mattered. But even more, you miss when your body agreed with your brain. You still want to contribute. You still have ideas. But they get stuck somewhere between your aching hips and the time it takes to stand up. Still you're here. Still sipping. Still snarking. Still sharp, if only in your head. You remind yourself Socrates didn't write anything down. His thoughts lived in the minds of those who listened. So maybe if you keep tossing out pithy sayings long enough, one of these kids will finally repeat something you said. You raise your cup toward the nearest group and say, "Wisdom isn't what you say loudest, it's what survives the longest." One of them smirks, not bad. You take that win. You decide to brave the walk to the palaestra, not because you're about to wrestle anyone gods forbid, but because sitting too long makes your joints seize up like rusty hinges. Plus, you're pretty sure someone there owes you a story. Or maybe a drachma. Possibly both. You shuffle past the columns, clutching your walking stick, a knobby olive wood affair that's become more companion than tool. You wave it vaguely at a young man sprinting by in nothing but sandals and confidence. Don't slip. Sandals are not armor, you mutter. He doesn't hear you, or pretends not to. Mainstream historical fact, the palaestra was more than just a gymnasium. It was a cultural hub. Men came here to train debate, gossip, and flex. But it was a younger man's space, and old age was quietly edged to the margins unless you were a philosopher or trainer. You settle on a bench under a fig tree, squinting into the sunlight, bouncing off oiled torsos and egos. A boy does a cartwheel. Another man wrestles a friend to the ground with theatrical flair. You shift slightly, trying to ease the cramp in your calf, and mutter, "Try that with sciatica, son." The air smells of sweat, crushed time, and something disturbingly goat-like. Someone's sandal goes flying and nearly clips your head. You give it a long, withering stare. The sandal, not the foot. Quirky tidbit. Some older men in Athens and Sparta served as wrestling coaches or were given honorary seating near the gym if they'd been great athletes in youth. Others, however, were gently or not so gently discouraged from loitering too long, lest they bring down the aesthetic. You remember when your own muscles weren't just decorative memories. You used to run laps here, hurl discus spar with boys who now own fleets and temples. Now you just count how many athletes grunt per minute and silently rank them from passable to trying too hard. A group gathers nearby to argue about Heracles versus Achilles. Classic. One of them spots you and half bows. Elder your opinion. You smile heart-blooming for a hot second. Achilles had the speed. Heracles the strength, but both would have pulled a hamstring by 50. Polite laughter. A few nods. One man snorts. "Maybe you should teach the class." You wag your stick at him. "Only if I can nap halfway through." Historians still argue whether Greek society valued the elderly more as moral teachers, or simply tolerated them, as long as they weren't in the way. Some texts show deep reverence. Others suggest polite sidelining with extra olives and less conversation. You notice a few others like you on the outskirts of the yard. Older men watching quietly, saying little, as if invisible until spoken to. You give them the nod. The elder nod, Tia. The universal acknowledgement of joints that forecast rain and memories that still make your chest tighten. Someone asks you to settle a bet about wrestling technique. You shuffle over, point out that the boy's stance is too wide, and boom, suddenly you're relevant. At least for 2 minutes. It's enough. Sometimes all it takes is one moment where your mind and body cooperate long enough to remind others and yourself that you're still part of this world. You limp back to your spot under the fig tree and sit with a long, satisfied sigh. A leaf falls gently onto your shoulder. You don't brush it off. You've earned that leaf. You wake from a nap. You didn't mean to take your chin sticking to your tunic and your spine, punishing you for existing past 70. The fig tree's shadow has shifted, and with it so has the afternoon air. Time to move again, slowly, carefully, like a tortoise with taxes. You wander down the dusty path toward the local temple, not for divine inspiration. You're on decent terms with the gods, and they mostly leave you alone, but because it's one of the few places where silence is sacred and sitting is encouraged. Mainstream historical fact: temples and sanctuaries weren't just religious centers. They served as meeting places, refuges, even courts. Elderly citizens, especially those retired from public life, often lingered there for community rest and maybe a glimpse of divine attention. You bow at the threshold, partly from reverence, partly from gravity. Inside, the familiar scent of incense and beeswax wraps around you. The flicker of oil lamps soothes your nerves more effectively than any poultice. There's a small group gathered, whispering about omens. Someone's goat refused to eat someone else's. Wife had a dream about an owl in a lemon tree. Classic Tuesday. You listen in, contribute a nod, and pretend you're still sharp enough to interpret portents. Quirky tidbit: some elders made extra coin as amateur dream interpreters. A wrinkled face and mysterious tone were basically the qualifications. One man reportedly claimed all dreams involving pomegranates were divine signs of lottery luck. He got quite popular until no one won. You're tempted to invent a prophecy now, just to see if it'll spread. The owl in the lemon tree means you whisper gravely that your pantry is about to get mice. A few of them chuckle. One woman looks alarmed. Another murmurs, "He might be right." You allow the mystery to linger. You light a small offering at the shrine. Nothing big, just a pinch of barley and a whispered thank you to Athena. Not for wisdom, for balance, literal balance. These stone steps are brutal. Historians still argue whether old age was genuinely spiritualized in Greek thought or simply associated with physical fragility and thus seen as closer to death and therefore the gods. Some argue temple access was used to preserve elder dignity. Others suggest it was a subtle form of exile with scented candles. You sit on a bench beneath a fresco of Demeter and her daughter. Their faces are faded, but the outlines remain. Like your memory. You can't remember the name of the man who gave you your first sword, but you remember the exact shade of red your wife wore the day you married her. She's long gone. The gods took her back and left you here half in this world, half tiptoeing toward the next. A child skips by and drops a flower at the statue's feet. You smile at the gesture and slip a copper drachma beside it. You pretend it's for the goddess, but really it's for the child. Let the next one think magic still answers coin. Your joints whisper that it's time to go. You rise slowly, give the gods a final nod, and leave the incense behind. Outside, the sun hangs low, your favorite time of day. Long shadows, soft light, and fewer people bumping into you. You head back to your house feeling a little steadier, a little less forgotten. Because sometimes, all it takes is one place where you're allowed to simply be. No advice required. No proving yourself. Just an old man, a quiet temple, and a half-decent breeze. The sun dips lower, painting the walls of your modest home in shades of bronze and apricot. You slide your sandals off with a grunt and collapse onto your favorite cushion, stuffed with straw, flattened by years of sighing into it. A clay bowl of olives waits on the table. You stare at it like it owes you an apology. Dinner these days is less feast, more survival. You used to enjoy lavish symposia, grapes, honeyed figs, wine you could actually taste. Now your meals are mostly soft and easy to chew. Even bread feels ambitious. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, the elderly typically relied on their families for sustenance. There were no retirement homes, no pensions. If your children didn't care for you, or you had no children, things got precarious fast. You pop an olive into your mouth and immediately wish you hadn't. It's bitter and warm, a bit like your general worldview these days. You still remember the last real symposium you attended. Reclining on couches, arguing philosophy between sips of diluted wine, laughing until your ribs ached. You told a joke about a Spartan, a Corinthian, and a goat. It killed. You've been chasing that high ever since. Quirky tidbit, some elderly Athenians hired themselves out as party guests. They were expected to bring clever conversation, sharp wit, or entertaining stories. If you could talk circles around younger men, you got free food, and maybe a flask of wine to go. You consider that for half a second now, then remember it requires staying awake past dusk. Never mind. Your joints ache in the way only well-used tools ache, like they deserve a medal and a nap. You rub your knees, whisper a curse at the gods, and shuffle toward the little clay hearth where your evening fire should go. You drop 2 twigs and a grumble into it. A knock at the door startles you. It's your neighbor, the one with 6 children, and the lungs of a trumpet. She brings you some leftover stew and a sentence that lasts 3 whole minutes. You nod, smile, say, 5 times, and she finally leaves. Historians still argue whether elder care in Greece was driven more by moral obligation or legal pressure. Some city-states enforced filial duty through law, while others relied on cultural expectations, especially the idea that aging parents were closer to the gods, and thus not to be angered. You spoon the stew slowly, letting the lentils remind you of simpler times. Not better, just less creaky. Later you step outside under the night sky, the stars sharp and scattered like silver dust. You lean on your cane and stare at Orion's belt, remembering when someone told you it was 3 heroes walking side by side. Now it just looks like a reminder that even stars are organized better than your spine. You think of your son living 2 cities over. He sends messages sometimes polite, infrequent, full of apologies. You don't blame him. You were probably just as distracted at his age. You write back, pretending not to notice the gaps. There's something strangely comforting about the rhythm of these evenings ache, eat, sigh, sky. Like your body has its own ritual calendar. You've become a priest of soreness and quiet pride. You give the stars one last nod and head inside. The cushion beckons again. So does sleep fitful, full of dreams, sometimes featuring people you haven't seen in decades. Sometimes people you hope to see again soon. Sleep, it turns out, is more of a negotiation these days. You shift. You fluff the cushion. You mumble something about your left hip being a traitor. The room creaks, like it knows your pain. Eventually sleep takes you, but not before making you earn it. And just when the dreams get good, something about racing Hermes across the sea on a chariot made of goats, you wake up. Not gently, not gradually, just awake, as if some invisible rooster slapped you. It's still dark. Of course it is. Mainstream historical fact, in ancient Greece, segmented sleep was normal. People would often sleep in 2 phases, waking up in the middle of the night to stoke the fire, pray snack, or even chat with neighbors also cursed by the moonlight. You sit up with a groan, grab your stick, and decide to take a midnight wander around your tiny home. Maybe your sandals are plotting something. Maybe the olives are multiplying. The hearth has gone cold. You poke at it like it personally offended you. The coals blink back in defiance. Quirky tidbit, some Greeks believed that restless sleep meant the gods were trying to whisper wisdom, or that you'd eaten too much goat cheese. One remedy: wrapping garlic in wool and placing it under your pillow. You tried that once. Your dreams were very social. You stare out the little window toward the street. It's silent, save for one drunk youth muttering a love poem to someone named Leto. You wonder if she's flattered or filing a complaint with Hera. You think about your old friends, some still alive, some definitely not. You used to joke that once you hit 60, you'd fake your death and spend the rest of your life disguised as a philosopher. Instead, you just got older and louder about back pain. Historians still argue whether Greek elders wielded real influence or were trotted out ceremonially like sentient garden statues. Some sources praise their wisdom in civic matters. Others treat them as convenient cautionary tales for overeager youth. You remember when someone asked you what you feared most about aging? You'd said, becoming invisible. But now you think maybe that's not so bad. It lets you observe. It lets you rest. It lets you pass gas in public without a single consequence. The sky starts to blush with dawn. The city stirs, faint and slow. You light the hearth again more for the company than the warmth, and let its gentle flicker guide your thoughts. You think about how you used to race this sunrise, running along the Acropolis steps with wild ambition. Now, you welcome it like an old friend who doesn't talk too much. You pour a small cup of wine, not enough to raise eyebrows. Just enough to toast the fact you're still here, breathing. Muttering occasionally relevant, you raise it toward the window, to another day of remembering half of things, and pretending that's wisdom. Outside, a rooster finally remembers his job and announces the obvious. You nod at him in solidarity. Time to start again. The morning slips in gently now, golden and familiar. You sit at the edge of your little courtyard, knees wrapped in a wool blanket that has definitely outlived two owners, and probably deserves its own obituary. The air smells like dew and worn clay. A neighbor sweeps dust into more dust. Someone's goat sneezes. A choir of mundane comforts. You sip watered wine because water alone feels like punishment. And breakfast is a single hunk of bread you chew like it owes you money. The teeth aren't what they used to be, some of them left in protest years ago. The others cling on for dear life. Mainstream historical fact. In many Greek city-states, particularly Athens, elderly citizens were allowed to speak at the assembly and were respected as repositories of civic memory. But daily survival, that was still a personal affair. There were no public services for aging. Your well-being lived or died with your family or your reputation. You shuffle to your stool and look out onto the slow scene of life, women filling water jars. Kids getting scolded for imaginary crimes, someone yelling about stolen figs again. You might not be the center of it anymore, but you're still part of the orchestra playing Triangle in the corner. A young boy walks by and calls you Papas, grandfather. He's not yours, but you wave anyway, and he smiles like you've shared something real. Quirky tidbit: Greek elders were often used as informal judges in neighborhood disputes, not because they were always fair, but because they had time and a long memory for who stole what goat in 438 BCE. You've settled into this stage of life like a well-worn sandal. A little cracked, a little creaky, but dependable. You're the guy who knows where the best figs grow, who remembers which neighbors to avoid at festivals, who still laughs when someone farts mid-prayer. You think about death, of course. It hums under the surface like a flute you didn't ask for. But you don't fear it anymore. If Hades wants you, he'll have to walk up these steps himself, and frankly, that'll be hard on his knees, too. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks viewed old age as honorable or burdensome. Some poems celebrate the wisdom of white-haired sages. Others depict old men as pitiful, mumbling shells of former warriors. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle, like most truths do. You run a hand through the remaining tufts of hair on your head, more out of habit than hope. The sun warms your face. Your eyelids droop. You won't sleep, but you might drift. It's different. You hear the bustle to begin, carts, laughter, argument, footsteps. Life doesn't wait for you anymore. But it nods as it passes, and sometimes that's enough. You smile without meaning to. And now, as the voices of the day soften to a distant hum, and the flickering torches of memory begin to dim, you settle deeper into your seat, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in stillness. The clatter of the agora fades, replaced by the hush of rustling olive branches above you. Your breaths stretch longer, slower. There is no rush now. No speeches to give, no steps to climb. Only the sweet surrender of rest. You've survived another day in ancient Greece, not as a hero, not as a philosopher, but as something far rarer, an elder enduring. A soul weathered smooth by time, content to let the world spin gently past. So close your eyes. Let the night take its time. You've earned the quiet. Sweet dreams. Hey guys, tonight we travel back to the icy, rain-slick shores of the North Sea, where longships slice through gray waves and the air reeks of seawater and smoke. You're not on the deck with the warriors, though. No, tonight, you're the unlucky soul dragged from your village wrist's bound throat, sore from screaming, and a lump on your head the size of a goose egg. Welcome to captivity. Welcome to the start of a very bad time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know your location and local time in the comments, maybe from somewhere a little less damp and Viking infested than this. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You can't see where they're taking you. Your head's still spinning, and the air smells like burning peat iron and wet dog, likely from the bearded brute yanking you along. The last thing you remember was trying to defend your farm with a rake. Spoiler, the rake lost. The longship creaks beneath your feet as you're dumped on board like a sack of bad potatoes. Around you, other captives moan. Someone's crying. Someone's muttering prayers that sound distinctly not Viking, which probably means they're just as doomed. Mainstream historical fact, Viking raids between the 8th and 11th centuries were as brutal as they were efficient. Raiding parties often took slaves called thralls to be used for labor trade or well entertainment. The trip back across the sea is a blur of nausea and wetness. One man gets seasick so often even the Vikings start looking sympathetic. You try to keep your head down, which is hard when a particularly rough wave causes you to headbutt a barrel of herring. The herring wins. The ship finally docks near a Viking settlement. No grand city here, just longhouses, muddy paths, and shouting in Old Norse. You're marched past livestock, snorting pigs, and a group of children who point at you and giggle. One throws a rock. Kids these days. Quirky tidbit, some Viking children played games by pretending to raid each other. So if you were hoping for moral outrage from the toddler crowd, don't. You're hauled toward a timber building that looks like it was designed by someone who hates sunlight. Inside, it's smoky warm and full of bearded men who glance up just long enough to acknowledge your pathetic existence. Then it's down to the dungeon. If you're imagining stone cells and iron bars, think again. The dungeon is more like a glorified root cellar, with a door that shuts with a sinister thud. Historians still argue whether Viking jails were formal institutions, or just whatever hole happened to be handy. Some believe prisoners were rarely kept long-term, with punishment often swift and fatal. But you're the exception. You're chained to a post with a ring so rusted it groans when you move. Your hands are raw, your knees ache from the boat, and your stomach growls with the same intensity as the guy snoring 2 bodies down. You don't know what's worse, the darkness or the uncertainty. Are they going to kill you? Sell you, forget about you entirely. You almost hope for the second one, assuming the buyer has decent hygiene and fewer axes. The floor is packed earth, and there's already a suspiciously moist spot nearby. You pretend it's spilled mead, because you're still trying to cling to some form of hope. It won't last long. Someone coughs violently in the corner. Someone else whispers in a language you don't understand. You're cold, you're hungry, and this is just day 1. Welcome to your new job title, prisoner, unpaid intern, and all-purpose chew toy for the Viking elite. And no, you probably won't survive this. The next morning, or maybe it's afternoon, you wake to the pleasant aroma of wet fur and stale breath. A rat the size of a small cat scurries over your foot like it owns the place. Frankly, it might. Your cell isn't really a cell at all. It's a shallow pit dug into the ground beneath the longhouse. The roof is so low you can't even stand up straight, and you bonk your head twice just trying to shift your weight. Above you, footsteps creak across wooden planks, and someone laughs, a hearty, mead-filled bellow that somehow makes your stomach cramp harder. The dirt around you is damp. Always damp. Condensation trickles down the walls, joining puddles of unknown origin. The chain binding your ankle is nailed into a stump, which gives you just enough mobility to pace a circle the size of a large dog bed. Not that pacing helps, your muscles are already stiff, and your feet are starting to blister. Mainstream historical fact. Viking longhouses sometimes featured dugout basements or storage pits beneath the main floor, which could double as holding areas for prisoners. These dungeons were designed for convenience, not comfort. You try to scratch your ankle, but accidentally tug the chain and earn a shock of pain. Soothing yourself, you hum a tune from home. Bad idea. A guard hears and smacks the boards above you with a stick, showering you in dust, and what you dearly hope is not dead mouse bits. You're not alone. A man with one eye and a tattoo of what looks like a snake sits hunched in the corner. He's been whispering to a lump in his lap for hours. You're hoping it's a rock and not a shrunken head. Every now and then he stops, stares at you, and grins like he knows your fate. Comforting. Quirky tidbit: Viking warriors sometimes kept small carved totems or spirit figures called seidkona for magical protection, though some prisoners claimed these were cursed instead. That lump might be smiling back at you. You try to sleep, but there's a constant dripping noise just loud enough to keep your brain twitching. Your back aches from the cold ground. Your breath fogs in the air, and your stomach is beyond empty. At one point, someone above dumps something through a trap door. It lands near your face with a sloppy splat. You lunge at it, only to realize it's half-eaten barley mash, still warm, possibly licked by a dog. Bon appetit. You chew slowly, trying not to think about it. After all, the alternative is nothing. Historians still argue whether Viking prisoners were deliberately starved or merely ignored. In your case, it feels like a mix of both. You're not valuable enough to be fed well, but not yet unimportant enough to kill. You're in the purgatory zone, the waiting room of misery. You try again to talk to Snake Tattoo Guy. He blinks at you slowly like a lizard. Then he offers you a piece of bread so hard it could double as a weapon. You accept it gratefully and pretend not to notice that it smells like fish and sadness. Time stretches. The light filtering through cracks in the floor shifts, casting shadows that dance like ghosts. A small girl's voice echoes from above, singing something lilting and sweet in Norse. You close your eyes and pretend she's singing for you. Then the song ends in a shriek and loud laughter. Probably just another Viking prank. You know, good old dungeon humor. You hear someone call for another round, and a loud belch follows. The scent of roast pork drifts down into your pit. You haven't tasted meat in what feels like years. You gnaw your fingers out of reflex and remind yourself you're not that desperate yet. You curl up in your little muddy quadrant and try to count the number of lice bites on your arm. You lose track at 17. It's fine. Math was never your strong suit. Above you, the party continues. Below, you wait. Sleep teases, but never quite comes. Your dreams are flashes home, bread warmth, and then the cold jolts you awake again. You're not in hell, technically. But if hell had a foyer, it would probably look like this. A groan from the stairwell jolts you upright. Well upright. Dish. The angle your spine has adopted over the last few days is more question mark than exclamation point. Footsteps descend, slow and deliberate, each creak of wood setting your nerves on fire. And then light. Blinding, glorious, agonizing light. A wooden hatch scrapes open above you, and a shape blocks the sun, a silhouette wide as a barrel and twice as mean. It's the jailer, and judging by the smell, he hasn't bathed since last winter. He grunts something in Old Norse, and before you can say a word, he tosses down a rope. You're being moved. Your limbs complain as you scramble up, slipping in something you don't want to identify. The rope burns your hands, but you cling to it like it's your last chance at fresh air. Spoiler it is. Mainstream historical fact: Viking prisoners were often paraded before the village as examples, living or soon to be dead, proof of Viking dominance and justice. You stumble into the open, blinking furiously. Sunlight. Breeze. Actual air that doesn't reek of mold and foot fungus. You don't even care that you're still in chains, or that every villager is staring at you like you're the punchline to a very grim joke. You're shoved onto a cart beside Snake Tattoo Guy, who is now singing softly to his rock again. A third man missing several fingers glares at both of you like you just insulted his grandmother. You try not to make eye contact. Rule number 1 of prisoner transport: don't provoke the guy with rage in his eyeballs, and nothing to lose. As the cart jerks into motion, you catch glimpses of village life. Children playing with carved wooden toys. Women stirring pots over open fires. A man sharpening a spear while casually watching you roll past. It's all disturbingly normal until you remember that for them you're just entertainment. Or maybe dinner. Quirky tidbit: in some Norse regions, captured enemies were briefly displayed in public spaces for ritual humiliation. Some even had their beards shaved off as an ultimate form of disrespect. Hair loss and shame. Tough combo. The cart creaks through the woods toward what looks like a stone building, or maybe a cairn. You don't know. Your Viking architectural knowledge is limited, and the bumping of the cart makes your teeth chatter like castanets. At one point, a kid throws a fish head at your face. You take that as a compliment. Eventually, you're hauled off and shoved inside a cramped, torch-lit hall that smells like tallow and unwashed ambition. You're lined up beside other prisoners, some Viking, some clearly foreign. A man in furs and a braided beard, definitely someone important, steps forward. He looks you up and down like he's considering whether you'd make better stew meat or slave labor. Then he speaks slow, deliberate, and just loud enough to make your ears hurt. Historians still argue whether Viking chieftains conducted formal prisoner trials or simply relied on intuition and vengeance. Based on the way Beardman is eyeing you, you suspect today's trial will be more gut feeling than due process. He points at one prisoner and barks. The guards drag that man away. He points at Snake Tattoo Guy and says nothing. Then he points at you and snorts. You're tossed back into the cart. Apparently you're not important enough to kill yet. Congratulations. You're on the fast track to something worse: manual labor. You're brought to a clearing where timber's being hauled and chopped. Dozens of other prisoners are already swinging axes, moving boulders, or digging like it's a group punishment exercise dreamed up by an especially bitter gym teacher. You're handed a shovel. The blade is cracked. The handle is splintered. The work is endless. You try to pace yourself, but after 20 minutes, you're sweating so hard, your clothes stick to you like a second skin. Your hands blister. Your arms ache, and the guard's whip whistles overhead anytime someone pauses too long. Snake Tattoo Guy, still nearby, hums while digging. You try not to scream. By nightfall, you're coated in dirt, blood, your own and more mosquito bites than a swamp frog. Back in your pit, you collapse like a sack of sad potatoes, and you still haven't seen a single whale-horned helmet. The next morning comes with a slap. Literally. A guard whacks you awake with a stick, and you jolt upright so fast you nearly knock yourself unconscious on the low ceiling. Charming way to greet the day, assuming it's even day. Time has become more of a feeling than a fact. You're dragged back into the open and herded toward the worksite again. But this time, something's different. There's a platform being built, a wooden stage, and nearby a group of townsfolk are already gathering, gossiping, and chewing what smells suspiciously like dried fish leather. You gulp. Snake Tattoo Guy is missing this morning, which makes you both relieved and deeply concerned. You overhear a whisper in a language you barely recognize, something about thrall auction and testing strength. Great. Nothing like being publicly evaluated like a head of cabbage. Mainstream historical fact. Viking societies often turned prisoners into slaves or thralls, who were used for farming construction or worse, entertainment. Some were traded like livestock at local markets or sacrificed in rituals. You're shoved forward and ordered to lift a barrel. Not just any barrel. This one looks like it's been filled with the combined sorrow of 1,000 fermented herring. You grunt, wobble, nearly fall backward. The crowd giggles. A boy yells something about how his grandmother could do better. You wish you could argue. Next up, a mock sword fight against a bored-looking teenager in leather armor. He's holding a blunted wooden sword. You're handed something that might have been a table leg in its past life. Spoiler alert, you do not win. You do, however, discover exactly how many times you can be hit in the ribs before your knees buckle. It's 4. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking communities amused themselves with prisoner games, including contests of strength or mock duels, where losing wasn't just embarrassing, it meant permanent status as a useless thrall. Worse than being owned was being considered worthless. You lie in the dirt, wheezing like a broken bellows as the crowd drifts away. A few toss scraps at you. One older woman drops a cloth bundle beside your head. It smells faintly of barley and pity. You're not executed, yay, but you're also not sent back to the dungeon. No, now you're property. A leather strap is tied around your neck. You're part of a human chain now. 4 others beside you, all in varying states of disbelief and poor hygiene. You're marched through uneven terrain toward a distant farmstead. The dirt turns to mud, the mud to slush, and by the time you arrive, your feet are soaked, your spirit is broken, and your dignity is back in the dungeon with Snake Tattoo Guy. The farm belongs to an old Viking widow with biceps like loaves of bread and an expression that suggests she's seen war winter and possibly your soul. She gives you a rake and a single word. Work. You rake. You haul hay. You milk a goat that seems personally offended by your presence. Your muscles scream your back curves and you long for the dungeon where at least you weren't being attacked by poultry. Historians still argue whether all Viking thralls were treated cruelly, or if some were absorbed into the household over time and gained status. Judging by how the widow eyes you, like you're a chicken that forgot how to lay eggs, you're not holding out much hope for promotion. At night you curl up in the barn next to the pig pen. It smells like fermented sadness. The other thralls avoid talking. Maybe they're exhausted. Maybe they gave up trying to remember their own names. You stare at the rafters, wondering if this is it, your whole new life. Hay humiliation and hostile goats. You'd kill for a toothbrush. And as you drift into an uneasy sleep, one haunting thought echoes. This is probably the best day you've had since arriving. Morning begins with the widow hurling a pail of icy water at your face. You flinch so hard, you inhale hay. That apparently counts as your bath for the week. Congratulations. Hygiene optional. Hope you weren't expecting warm porridge and a morning stretch. You get straight to your new job, scraping something that may have once been turnips off the floor and re-spreading hay in a pattern that makes no sense, but is very important to the pigs. You're rewarded with a slop bucket and a withering glance. One mainstream historical fact, Viking farms were brutal places for prisoners. Thralls did everything from mucking out stalls to grinding grain until their hands blistered. They were the first up last down, and often slept in barns, or worse, under the barn. You try not to take it personally when the goat headbutts you again. Maybe it's your face, or your smell. Hard to say. The other thralls are just as crusty, though one of them, a gaunt older man with half an ear, finally mumbles something over the evening meal. It's some kind of warning, vague, ominous, and definitely involving the words blot and woods. You pretend not to panic. Blot is the Norse term for sacrifice, and yes, sometimes humans were involved. Not often, not casually, but enough that you suddenly feel very uncomfortable about being new expendable and alone in a foreign land. Quirky tidbit in some sagas. Human sacrifices were buried alive with warriors or chieftains. Occasionally prisoners were considered offerings to the gods. So, sleep tight. That night, something feels different. The moon is too bright, the wind too quiet. You can't stop replaying the old thrall's muttered warning. You imagine being tied to a stone slab while a guy in a wolfskin hat thanks Odin by carving runes into your kneecaps. Historians still argue whether sacrificial blots were religious necessity or fear-driven spectacle. Some claim they were rare and exaggerated by later chroniclers. Others insist they were more common in times of plague war or desperation, which, let's face it, is every Tuesday in Viking land. The next day, you're ordered to load a cart with supplies, barley mead cloth, and oh good, a single bound and blindfolded chicken. You're not sure if you're delivering these, trading them, or accompanying them into the afterlife. The cart rolls out just after dawn, bumping down narrow tracks, while the widow walks beside it, humming what may or may not be a funeral tune. You're tethered to the rear like a very confused mule. You pass villages, forests, even a stone altar that makes the hairs on your neck sit up and scream. Eventually, the cart stops near a river bend, where a handful of people have gathered around a bonfire. You spot a priest, a man in fur robes with a ceremonial axe and a permanent frown. That's close enough. A murmur ripples through the small crowd. Then Relief, the chicken, is the chosen one today. There's chanting, a little dancing, some blood from the chicken. Not you, and lots of drinking. Turns out it's a harvest blessing, not a death cult. You almost cry with joy. Almost. That night back at the farm, you realize something even more disturbing. You're adjusting. You know which chickens are friendlier, which pigs not to look in the eye, and how to dodge most of the widow's slaps. You no longer smell the barn. You start finishing your bowl of cold fish stew before the others do. You even learn a few Viking curse words mostly shouted at you. But hey, progress. And for the first time, as the stars blink overhead and the animals settle into sleep, you wonder if this is survivable. If this muck and moonlight and constant danger is your new normal. Then you hear distant drums, and the hair on your neck stands up again. You wake the next morning feeling like something's changed. Maybe it's the cold. Maybe it's the eerie way the other thralls are avoiding eye contact. Or maybe it's the fact that the widow is humming again. That same haunting tune from the blot gathering. And humming in Viking terms never seems to precede anything good. Your job today isn't with the pigs. No, today you're being escorted without explanation into the forest. The same forest the half-eared thrall warned you about. 2 burly men from the Longhouse Guard flank you like bookends with bad attitudes. You try to joke something about how you forgot your cloak, but neither even grunts. Just a firm shove forward. The trees grow thicker, the air colder, the birds quieter. Somewhere between your 3rd stumble over a root and your 7th regretted life choice, you reach a clearing. It's not empty. There's a stone circle blackened at the edges, and what looks suspiciously like a post for tying people to. Great. Mainstream historical fact, Viking societies practiced law through assemblies called things where disputes were resolved and punishments handed out. But when laws failed or weren't available, community justice took over, which sometimes meant punishment in the middle of nowhere. You're really hoping this is just a stern lecture. It's not. A man steps forward, a Gothi or priest judge. He reads something from a carved staff. You catch only fragments: trespass, foreign tongue, dream, omen. Are you being judged for something you didn't even know was illegal? Quirky tidbit: Norse people believed in prophetic dreams and omens. If someone dreamed about you in a negative light, that could literally spark a community intervention. And apparently one of the farmer's wives dreamed you were a wolf in disguise. That's not metaphorical. That's grounds for punishment. You half expect to be lashed or banished or turned into stew, but instead, you're tested. They hand you a smoldering iron rod and tell you to carry it across the clearing. Bare-handed. You laugh. They don't. This is ordeal by fire. If your hands heal clean after 3 days, you're innocent. If they fester, well, better luck in Valhalla. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were genuinely believed to reveal divine judgment, or if they were just social control wrapped in spiritual tinsel. Either way, you're now holding a burning hot chunk of iron, trying not to scream. Spoiler, you scream. A lot. You're wrapped in moss, tied with rabbit skin, and marched back to the farm. The widow says nothing, but she eyes your bandaged hands with something between pity and annoyance. You're not expected to work that day, silver lining, but you also don't get dinner. Apparently, being semi-barbecued doesn't excuse laziness. That night you lie awake, throbbing hands pulsing in sync with the wind. The stars blur overhead. You think about the irony, accused not for what you did, but for what someone dreamed. It's so medieval it makes your teeth ache. Yet in the blurry delirium of the early morning hours, a strange realization blooms you're surviving. Not well, not comfortably, but your feet still touch the earth. Your lungs still take in the icy air. And despite every insult, every burn, every indignity, you're still here. Of course, this revelation is immediately interrupted by one of the goats stepping directly on your burnt fingers. Welcome back to reality. You spend the next 3 days praying your hands won't turn black and crusty. Because if they do, you're not just guilty, you're cursed. That's how the Vikings see it. Your moss-wrapped mitts smell like a burnt log doused in sour milk, and the swelling makes them look like pale turnips. During this time, you're fed sparingly and kept under watch. The younger thralls whisper behind your back, and you swear the farm dog is judging you harder than usual. The widow. She just grunts at you and tosses you a sliver of dried fish now and then, like she's feeding a particularly disappointing squirrel. On the 4th day, you're dragged out again, this time to show your wounds to the Gothi. He unwraps the bandages slowly, dramatically, the way a reality show host draws out results. One hand looks decentish, the other festering, blistered, not winning any ancient Norse beauty contests. The verdict is unclear. Some villagers think it's a sign from the gods, maybe you're guilty of something, but not everything. Others think the gods are still deciding. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more religious spectacle or useful tools for dealing with outsiders like you. Either way, you're not executed. Yay! Instead, you're sent to penance labor, which sounds noble, but actually means digging latrines. In winter, with your wounded hands. Fun. Mainstream historical fact: Viking societies used penal labor for minor crimes or judgments. Offenders might be sentenced to hard labor or reparations like building fences, chopping firewood, or hauling dung. You lucky, you get all 3. At once. The days blur. Your hands throb constantly and the cold makes everything sting. You swear you start hallucinating conversations with the pigs. One of them gives great relationship advice. You name him Bjorn. Quirky tidbit: there's some evidence that Viking thralls would whisper their dreams to pigs as a kind of folk superstition, believing pigs could absorb misfortune or reveal secrets. Whether true or not, you find yourself whispering to Bjorn every night. He never judges. He just snorts in understanding. Life becomes repetitive. Dig, carry, scrape. Sweat freeze. Eat moldy barley. Sleep next to a goat with indigestion. At some point you start dreaming in Old Norse. That can't be good. But something shifts. One icy dawn, the widow actually hands you a second piece of fish, no words. Just fish. A gesture. Maybe pity. Maybe peace. Or maybe she just needed to clear out leftovers. Who knows, Viking hospitality is subtle. You begin to notice small kindnesses. One of the younger thralls silently leaves a better blanket by your sleeping corner. The farm dog only growls half-heartedly now, and even the farmer's scowls have softened from "I might disembowel you" to mild indigestion. You're still the outsider, the one who screamed during the fire test, the one with dreams that scare the goats. But now, you're also the one who survived, the one who keeps going. And in a Viking world that values toughness and fate and sheer pig-headed persistence, you're starting to earn a sliver of respect. But don't get cocky. Tomorrow you're being sent to the docks. The sea wind is calling. And spoiler, it doesn't get easier out there. The salty sting of sea air slaps your cheeks before the frost can numb them. You stand at the dock, bundled in every scrap of wool the widow begrudgingly let you borrow. Hands still wrapped, breath curling in ghostly wisps as the longship creaks and rocks impatiently. You're not a Viking, not even a real freeman, but the Jarl's warband needs bodies, and technically you're repaying your debt to society. Translation: you're expendable, and they're short on muscle. You're pushed aboard like cargo. No goodbye. No luck wishes, just a slap on the back from a one-eyed sailor who calls you fish bait and hands you a filthy oar. Charming. Rowing a Viking longship sounds epic in textbooks, but in real time, it's a medieval CrossFit nightmare. Your arms scream. Your wounded fingers feel like they're being flossed with nettles, and the guy beside you keeps vomiting into the sea with disturbing regularity. The rhythm of rowing is punctuated by shouts, splashes, and occasional flatulence. Romantic. Mainstream historical fact, Viking expeditions weren't all pillaging and plunder. Many were long, grueling trade journeys or scouting missions that involved backbreaking labor, poor nutrition, and very questionable hygiene. You'll get to not bathe for weeks. The first night at sea is cold beyond description. You sleep sitting up shoulder to shoulder with sailors who snore like dying walruses. The only thing that keeps you from rolling overboard is sheer exhaustion and the occasional whack from the shipmaster's stick. Then the weather turns. Rain pelts like needles. Wind howls like Odin's mad cousin. The sea rises. The ship groans and you grip your oar and pray not just to survive, but to avoid vomiting into your own lap. Quirky tidbit, some Viking sailors carried sea charms, little carved amulets or knotted hair tokens from loved ones believed to guard against storms. Yours is a crusty goat tooth, given by Bjorn the pig, spiritually speaking. Does it work? The ship doesn't sink. So maybe landfall is a relief and a curse. You dock at a rocky coastal outpost and are immediately put to work offloading goods. Amber furs, dried fish, and refilling barrels of water that smell faintly like squirrel. You spend the night under a tarp beside a dying fire, dreaming about hot baths and not rowing. Then a raid happens, or to be fair, a show of force which mostly involves yelling at terrified villagers waving axes and collecting some tribute. You're ordered to carry barrels and chickens. The chickens do not cooperate. Historians still argue whether all Viking expeditions were intended for conquest, or if many were simply aggressive forms of negotiation. Either way, you're now carrying stolen eggs in a basket made of regrets. One afternoon you hear the sailors whispering. A storm is coming, a bad one. Supplies are low. Morale is lower. The shipmaster flips a bone-carved coin and declares it's time to head back. The return voyage is rougher. Your hands reopen. Your stomach rebels. You hallucinate Bjorn giving you a pep talk in iambic pentameter. It's beautiful, but you make it. Barely. Salt-crusted, sunburned, and spiritually cracked like old pottery, you step back onto the shore. The same village, the same muddy road. But you're different. You've survived the dungeon, the trial, the labor, the sea, and even an enraged chicken. That's more than most prisoners ever manage. You're still technically a thrall, still looked at sideways by the locals, but you're not nothing. Not anymore. Someone even greets you by name. That's progress. And when the next raid season comes, they'll need bodies again. You know they'll ask you. And heaven help you, you might say yes. Because in the Viking world, there are worse things than rowing, worse things than pain. Like being forgotten. You slump down in your sleeping corner, now slightly upgraded with fewer lice, and slightly more blanket. The coals of the fire glow low. Your fingers twitch from old pain. The wind sighs outside. You made it. Not clean, not proud, but alive. And in this world, that's a victory. Now let's gently close your eyes and picture the firelight dancing on the walls, casting soft flickers over your face. The creak of timber, the murmur of waves outside the hall, the steady warmth of your breath rising and falling like the tide. You are not a hero, not a legend, but you are still here. And tonight, that is enough. Sweet dreams.